My name is Susan Jen, and we're just welcoming you into our program today. Taste and See. It's got a couple different names going with it. Taste and See, the Healing Kitchen, and the Science and Art of Natural Healing Methods. And that's really what we're trying to promote, are these natural healing methods. So some of you may have been here, we're doing this the second Sunday of each month until we get to the end of the year. So there will be another one in November and another one in December. And if I can just lay it out a little bit, we started with the water as a natural healing remedy. And we talked about charcoal poultices, and we talked about even things that you can put together, poultices from your own kitchen, onions and garlic and cabbage and castor oil and many different things. And that was an all after minutes. So we're just going to launch into it with an overview today. The second part, we're going to talk more about immunity next month, what it has to do with immunity. And we'll be talking about some other factors that are very significant in immunity. And as you know, that is a big deal in what is going on in the world today. And then in December, we're going to talk more about mental health. And we're going to be talking about many different factors, but in terms of microbiome part 3, they are now finding that the microbiome has a big link between anxiety and depression and a lot of mental health factors. So we're trying to tie this all together in something that is easy for you to take in step by step. So we are welcoming you and just thrilled that you're with us. We're going to have some delicious food, samples by the time we get to the end of the afternoon, and we're just going to, I see a few more people coming in, so I'm just talking a little bit until we can kind of get all of these people in. But as always, we're delighted to have you with us, and I see many familiar faces, and I'm happy to see those familiar faces. So before we get started, let's just take a minute here to invite the presence of God into our afternoon activity. Our most kind and gracious Heavenly Father, we just bow before you, before your throne of grace, this magnificent. We ask that you would be with Dr. Chang as he is speaking, and that you would be with each of us as we are presenting, and that you will just open an opportunity for us to be open and to be able to have friendly exchange and just the blessing of being here today. So we thank you, Father, for hearing and answering our prayers in accordance with your word. In thy precious name we pray. Okay, so Dr. Chang, and I don't know whether I mentioned, you maybe already know, we're starting part 1 here. The food demonstrations will be over in the fellowship hall. Did you already get that piece of information? It gives you It gives you a little break between the presentation and going over to the food demos. We had a little trouble getting our PowerPoint to work over in the other room, so that's the reason why we're starting here.
All right, good afternoon, everyone. Glad to see so many faces and many familiar. So today we're going to talk about a topic that many of you have gotten exposed to in some form of fashion, and that's what you eat. You know, you get exposed from a very young age, the art of eating. And, you know, sometimes you'll go to a physician and they may tell you, hey, you got some things going on, you might want to try to eat healthier, start exercising. But the actual definition, eat healthy, oftentimes gets confusing because there's all these fad diets that kind of go through and everyone's like, oh, it's doing amazing. And so we want to just clarify some of these things. And I believe that the key to understanding these things is One, to look at what God gave us originally, and two, to consider that we have microorganisms living in us. So it's not that, we think viruses and bacteria, and we get scared like, oh, they cause infections. But actually, they live with us all the time. And so if we consider how we influence them, I think we'll understand how they influence our health. And so, what do you guys think was the #1 cause of death in the United States in 2020? So I heard heart disease, cancer, COVID. Actually, you're right, it is heart disease. You would think from the news that it was COVID, but actually it's still heart disease. And as a matter of fact, if you look at the statistics, in our next slide, you see, this is from the CDC's official release, and we see that in 2020, heart disease is at #1, and it's been at #1 as far back as 2015. As a matter of fact, it's been at #1 for a very long time. And so, it was responsible for the death of 690,000 people in 2020. That's quite a few number of people. Compared to COVID was at 345,000, so it did kill quite a few people, but still, heart disease was responsible for double the number of deaths last year. #2 was cancer. Cancer was responsible for close to 600,000 people dying last year. And so, are these diseases things that we can try to address in some form of fashion? Or is it simply stents and surgeries? That's the only route I can take to actually help with these diseases. So let's look at some alternate approaches as we talk. And today, the title of this topic is the microbiome, digestion, and the healing place. Because like I mentioned before, the microorganisms in our gut and throughout our digestive system influence our health. And so we have to understand that. So let's start off with digestion. Physiology, most people have not taken a comprehensive physiology class, and so when you start talking about this, I'm going to go very superficial because I don't want to lose any of you in this. And so this is kind of the digestive system from the top all the way down. Now, the part that we're most involved in starts at the top, and that's our mouth, right? And so if we go to that next slide, and we'll start to zoom in on some of these areas. In your mouth, we see that food enters straight through your mouth, and when you're eating, your tongue is kind of moving things around, your teeth are grinding things. You can think of it as a blender. Your mouth and your stomach work together. Except, you know how the blender, it grinds stuff at the bottom, and at the top it's kind of mixing it all around? Well, the stomach is kind of the mixer, but there's no blades in the stomach. And so the blades are up here. And now what happens, you ever made a smoothie and you just had whole chunks in there, the blender just didn't work properly? Well, that's how your stomach feels when you didn't grind stuff up here. So it's very hard to digest things because there aren't any blades after your mouth. And so digestion it starts with what we do here. And so you never want to just like gobble your food down. You want to make sure you grind it up till it's a good, soft consistency, ready for the stomach to just start chemically digesting it. Does that make sense? So this is where everything starts. Because these little particles, as they get through your system, if they're not getting digested, they can ferment, they can cause other issues. So #1, chewing. And in the mouth, we have salivary glands, they release saliva. When we smell the food next door, our saliva may start to release. And so that's to just kind of moisturize things, get it ready for digestion. Finally, you swallow the food, and it goes down through the esophagus into your stomach. So that will be our next slide. And we see once it drops down through the esophagus to the stomach, in your stomach, it creates an acidic environment. And so that acidic environment helps to break down proteins specifically. So your proteins are getting digested in your stomach. Now the acid, it's two functions: to activate the enzymes for the protein digestion, and #2, it's to protect you because food is coming in a foreign substance. There could be bacteria, there could be things that could cause harm to you. So there's this barrier to prevent dangerous things from entering. So now that you start protein digestion, that acid, have you guys ever had acid reflux or episode where your chest starts to burn after you eat? Yeah, so when you eat, you don't want to lay down because the food and the acids can start trying to come back through your esophagus, causing reflux. Other things, when the food drops down, there's a muscle that tightens to keep acid from coming back up. Now, things that might loosen up that muscle, caffeine, spicy foods. So you know, reflux disease, you might get the spicy foods might trigger the reflux disease. So you got to be aware of what foods are going to influence what parts of your system, especially if you have some of these conditions. So these are basics. It drops the esophagus into the stomach. Stomach starts churning things through. Once it's all well ground and the proteins have started digesting, it releases it into the duodenum, or the small, we'll just keep it small intestine, right? So now your small intestine is responsible for beginning to break it down into the finest particles. Because a large particle, if you drop it on your skin, is it going to absorb? Not really, right? And so it has to break it down into really microscopic sections in order for it to actually get absorbed into nutrition. Because why do we eat? You know, we eat, obviously there's a pleasure component. We enjoy eating. You should enjoy your food. But the second thing is we're eating to live, to have nutrition in our bodies. And so your body has to break it down in order for it to be absorbed. And that's the small intestine. So let's go to the next slide. Finally, once it's broken it down, it's absorbed the vitamins, the minerals, the carbohydrates, the proteins, the fats, and the nucleic acids. You start to move it all the way through. Your small intestine is extremely long. It's just goes all the way through, and finally it gets to the colon. And the colon is just going to take some fluid out, kind of get the waste products that were prepared throughout your digestive system, and it'll start getting it ready to release. And that's kind of the final step. Now, the normal time it should take from going through your mouth to actually going all the way through is about 24 to 36 hours. You guys know how you can test that? There's actually some ways you can test it. You can test it by consuming beets, a large amount of beets. That'll help you to see, by the time you consume the beets to the time your stool changes color, it should be like a darkish, purplish almost color, or reddish. That's how you know how long it takes for things to go through your system. If it's taking more than 2 days, that's quite a bit of time. And so you might want to work on some ways to get your transit time more efficient and better. Why is that? Because if it goes too fast, you're not absorbing nutrients. So when you get, if you ever had the stomach flu or stomach virus or anything like that, food poisoning, that's a fast transit time. It's going way too fast. And so nothing's getting absorbed, no nutrition. A slow transit time is when you're constipated, things just aren't moving through. That is going to cause things to kind of spoil inside your system, which promotes disease. So this is the summary of your whole digestive tract. Pretty simple, right? Everyone understands it now? That's kind of a basic model, but I think it's important for us to get a premise. But all throughout this system, there are bacteria in there. There are different microbes in there. And that's what we call the gut microbiome. Gut meaning your digestive tract, microbiome meaning microorganisms that are living inside us. Now, why do we need to remember that? Let's look at it. Let's look at what is the gut microbiome. Let's go to the next slide. So, microbiome, think microorganism. So, micro meaning microscopic, meaning you won't see it with the naked eye. And organism, these are living cells, and especially bacteria, virus, or fungus. Now, how much of these do we have? There are more than 100 trillion microbial cells in one human being, over 100 trillion. As a matter of fact, they outnumber the number of human cells you have. You have more bacterial and fungus and cells than you actually have human cells. So most of you is actually a bacteria or something else. So if you look at the DNA, less than 10% of the DNA in a human being, they estimate, is actually from a human. It's actually mostly, over 90%, from bacteria and other organisms. So that's sort of a strange thought if you really get deep into it. But the gut microbiome, it's a dynamic environment. It's always changing depending on how you're changing it. And there's this mix. There are good bacteria, and then there are bad bacteria. So good bacteria, bad bacteria, it's kind of an overgeneralization. Good bacteria are the ones that are going to promote good health. They're going to help absorb vitamins. They're going to help prevent disease. Bad bacteria are going to release toxins. They're going to contaminate your bloodstream, cause heart disease, cancers, and different diseases. Does that make sense? And so what we want to do is kind of get that balance in our favor. So does research demonstrate this? Let's look at this. Why should we understand this? Let's go to our next slide. It says, how many know that the environment has a huge impact on us? When we have the wildfires, our eyes get irritated, our breathing gets difficult. So the environment has a huge impact. And what we've found is it's not just about genetics. Disease is not all genetics. It's also about environment. And so one of the biggest environmental factors that we get exposed to is our food. And it's considered the largest environmental exposure. It's what we actually eat. We eat every single day. And what it says, our metabolism and absorption of food occurs through the stable yet dynamic filter of trillions of bacteria that populate our digestive system, making the gut microbiota a filter of our largest environmental exposure. So when we eat, those gut bacteria get to feel on all the food that we consume and modify it in ways that they're designed to do. So how is this relevant for disease, right? Because that's the real factor. We're trying to prevent disease, we're trying to promote health in our system. Well, if you look at this diagram, we're going to zoom in on some different sections, but we're looking at food consumption leading to heart attacks, strokes, death, and revascularization. So let's see where in this process these bacteria might play a role. So let's go to the next slide. We're going to zoom in on one of these areas. So we see food is being consumed that is high in carnitine and choline. These are just two substances you find in some foods, many foods. So it's being consumed, and as it goes through your digestive system, the gut microbiota, or gut flora right over here, convert that choline or carnitine into TMA, trimethylamine. Now, trimethylamine, you know, if you get high levels in your system, the most it could do is make you smell a little fishy, which might not be too comfortable. But the problem is your liver tries to detoxify that TMA. And what happens then? Let's go to the next slide. The TMA becomes TMAO. And TMAO is linked to heart attacks, strokes, death, and problems with blood flow. So let's go a little deeper. It said, this is a study, it was published, this is an article published in Harvard Health, and it says 3 recent analyses have linked high blood levels of TMO with a higher risk for both cardiovascular disease, or heart disease, and early death from any cause. In one of those studies, researchers found that people with higher levels of TMAO in their blood may have more than twice the risk of heart attack, stroke, and other serious cardiovascular problems. Are we seeing how one is linking to the other and there's such an intimate relationship? So consuming carnitine choline, all of a sudden the gut bacteria are converting it into TMA, our liver converts it into TMAO, TMAO causes big problems. You follow that? Let's go to the next slide. Now the key question is, like, okay, I don't want to die from the #1 killer in the United States, so how do I reduce my TMAO? Well, what foods contain choline and L-Carnitine? Because if I eat high quantities of these foods, then I'm going to get high levels of TMAO. You follow that? So let's go to what foods contain high levels. The body makes TMAO from foods with choline and L-Carnitine. Nutrients that are abundant, this is straight from the study published in the Journal of the American Medical Association. Nutrients that are abundant in meat, poultry, fish, dairy, and egg yolks. So these are the top 5 foods that contain choline and L-Carnitine. Now, that's quite a broad range. That's really the majority of the standard Western diet. So you'd basically be converting to eating nothing for the majority because it's so prominent in our diets. But unfortunately, that's the reason that our rates of cardiovascular disease are so high. So we go to the next slide. What about cancer? That was our number 2. Does this have any links to that? Does TMAO maybe have a relationship with it? The Women Health Initiative observational study, so we found that women in the highest TMAO quartile, meaning having the highest levels, had an approximately 3.4 times greater risk of rectal cancer. And so a significant increase in rectal cancer, and many other studies have shown head and neck cancer links, oral cancer, lung cancer, prostate cancer, colorectal cancer. So they're kind of investigating this because it seems like there's a very strong link between these substances that are produced from our food and these particular cancers, but especially heart disease. Let's go to the next slide. So gut bacteria and TMA, because TMA was what was produced and that got converted to TMAO. It says as choline, phosphatidylcholine, and carnitine are primary sources of gut microbiota-associated TMAO production, so those foods produce TMAO, dietary modulation is a logical intervention strategy. So lower the amount of L-Carnitine and choline that you consume. That makes sense, right? Then I'll just produce less TMAO. It says we previously showed that vegetarians and vegans have markedly reduced synthetic capacity to make TMA and TMAO from dietary L-Carnitine. What's that saying? It's saying that vegetarians and vegans tend to make less TMAO than someone who isn't, someone who just is an omnivore. And there was a study that was done that showed steak is very high in in choline and carnitine. So you would expect if you eat a steak, your TMAO level should spike. Well, in vegetarians and vegans, they found that it didn't really spike that much. And the problem was they don't have those bacteria to convert it. Does that make sense? And so because their flora is so different from the way they eat with such low levels of carnitine and choline, they actually couldn't even produce any TMAO, or barely even produce any. Whereas someone who is on a regular consumption of meat products and animal products, they tended to have an extremely high spike off of eating that steak. So these are very relevant to our daily health, and that's why we're talking about it today. And let's keep going. So the question is, that was just one example, and we can talk about many different diseases that we deal with today and see the link between these little bacteria in our guts and how they connect with the diseases we deal with. But we're not going to go into that. That's going to be hours worth of presentation, and we want to get to the food demo because that's where the enjoyable part of this is. And so what does the healing plate look like? Have you guys heard of probiotics before? Anybody? Yeah, it's a craze, like take your probiotics. So let me explain. Probiotics is just the bacteria, right? So they're trying to get you to have the healthy bacteria in your gut. So you're consuming the healthy bacteria. It kind of makes sense. The only issue is if you just transport healthy bacteria into your gut without actually feeding them, all they're going to do is starve to death. And so that's the issue. So probiotics, while they might be helpful in certain settings, if you never feed the bacteria that you throw in there, they're just going to die. And so the key is what's called prebiotics. Prebiotics has to do with what you eat, because what you eat is going to be what your bacteria eats. And if the bad bacteria are getting fed, you're going to have bad bacteria. If the good bacteria are being fed, then you're going to have a lot of good bacteria. It's going to affect your metabolism. It's going to affect your ability to process blood sugar or sugars, and that's going to affect your blood sugar ultimately. So it's highly tied together. So that's the key. And many people always ask this question: how do I adjust my gut microbiome? Well, you have to adjust your prebiotics. And if you adjust your prebiotics, your natural bacteria are going to change. And that takes time. It's not an immediate change. People say, oh, I did this, I didn't feel better immediately. It's going to take time for all your bacteria to change to the right bacteria. So, okay. So, the healing plate, number one, fiber feeds good bacteria and microbes. So should I just go get some Metamucil and just consume a lot of that every single day? Now that's not a healthy way to approach it. There is some processing in making those things, and so you always want to eat food the natural way. A lot of the supplementation, yes, they have their place, but you want to consume the food directly because that's the best way. It's contained in its natural form, and it's already prepared for you to eat in that particular way. So fiber-rich foods, you know what's the only place you can find fiber? It's in plants. It's the only way you can get fiber, it's in plants. And so that's exactly what fiber is. And so the more plants you consume, You know, our parents and grandparents, they always told us, eat your fruits and veggies. It's sort of advice that has been lost, but they were right. Eat your fruits and veggies. Those plant-based things, the herbs, they have the fiber, and that's really essential for our gut bacteria. So, essentially, a whole food plant-based diet will not only have low L-Carnitine, low choline, but it has rich in fiber. So actually get rid of the bacteria that cause these problems. They're going to die off naturally. And you're going to be feeding the good bacteria, which are going to promote health for you. So it's kind of a simplistic approach to it. So, and they're naturally rich in fiber, because a plant-based diet, plants are the source of fiber. Now, bad bacteria thrive off several things. And some of these things are going to surprise you. Processed sugar, that's not going to surprise you. Processed sugar the bad bacteria love processed sugar. Highly processed foods. So it's not just about being vegan. You can be vegan. I've talked about this before. And eat Oreos. You can be vegan and eat Skittles. It's all technically vegan. But it's not just about being vegan. You can be a very unhealthy vegan. It's about eating plants. So eating the fiber. And then avoiding artificial sweeteners. You know, it says sugar-free, and I was like, oh, I'm going to get that. I'm drinking sugar-free. Well, the problem is that sugar-free product is actually promoting the growth of bad bacteria in our guts. So you want to steer clear of the sugar-free label. It's really advertising. Another thing is animal-based foods, and we talked about that. So the fats, they tend to feed a lot of the bad bacteria and promote some of these diseases. Fried foods, even of plant-based origin, and then alcohol. So all these will promote bad bacteria. Finally, you want to avoid any unnecessary antibiotic use. And so, you know, being a physician, there have been times where I prescribed an antibiotic and I look back and I say, you know what, it probably didn't need an antibiotic. Their body was going to take care of it. So you want to, while antibiotics seem very benign, using it just for everything, in medicine we've realized we've created a problem. Antibiotic-resistant bacteria. Because we've dished out antibiotics so much that, you know, we've just selected for resistant bacteria. Well, unnecessary antibiotic use can destroy not just the bad bacteria that might be affecting you, they destroy all your good bacteria too. So it pushes the reset button on all your bacteria. And when you push the reset button, if you're not taking in the prebiotics you need to produce good bacteria, it's going to be a very poor outcome. Because it can affect your mental health, it can affect your cardiovascular health. And we're going to get into some of this. This is just a preview. But it can affect you in so many ways, just from changing all your gut bacteria. And another one is pesticide use. Unfortunately, in our world, we're getting exposed to pesticides. And those pesticides change our gut bacteria. And so this is just a quick preview. Now, many of you might just hear some of these things and say, wow, what am I going to eat? And when I first got introduced to these topics, I wondered the same thing. And so we thought it appropriate, when we presented some of this content, that we actually show you what you can't eat. And we're going to start off with something simple, with soups. So I hope this was a blessing to you guys, and I look forward to presenting more on these topics and seeing how it relates. But I don't want to hold us up from getting to our next step, and how we show you how to make it at home.